She wasn't looking for anything special that day, just a cheap plot of land and maybe some old wood worth salvaging. But when Claire Jensen bought a half-collapsed barn for $200 at a county auction, she never expected to find a Cold War-era fighter jet sealed inside, untouched, wings folded like it had been waiting for someone to find it. What started as a fixer-upper turned into a classified trail of forgotten tech, sealed records, and a legacy her late grandfather never spoke about. Some barns hide rusty tractors. This one hid a secret worth millions, and maybe more. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. We love hearing your stories. And if tales of mystery, lost history, and unexpected second chances spark something in you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's story, it might just top this one. The county fairgrounds smelled like sun-warmed hay and stale coffee, and Claire Jensen had no idea why she was still there. Her boots crunched gravel as she wandered past rows of rusted trailers and half-collapsed sheds marked with spray-painted lot numbers. Most bidders were already packing up. The good stuff had gone early: antique tractors, oil signs, even a busted vending machine someone paid too much for. She'd come out of curiosity, maybe a chance to grab scrap wood for her workshop, but something kept her wandering. The auctioneer was down to his final clipboard page when he muttered, "Lot 119. Abandoned barn structure. South parcel. As is. Access not guaranteed." He barely looked up. "Do I hear 100? Claire paused. Something about the words caught her. Barn structure. Not barn wood. Not debris. Structure. No one raised a hand. 80? Still nothing. She hesitated, then raised a few fingers. 200, she said. A few heads turned, not in interest in amusement. A man with a John Deere cap snorted. "You just bought a pile of ivy and termites." The gavel hit. "Sold. $200. Lot 119. It didn't feel like anything. No adrenaline, no regret. Just a quiet certainty that she'd stepped toward something. 2 days later, she was staring at it, or what was left of it. The barn sat on a 5-acre plot down a gravel road, tucked behind a wall of overgrowth that had long since claimed the mailbox and fence. The roof had folded inward like a broken spine. One side was open to the woods, the other wrapped in twisted sheet metal. Vines climbed up through every crack. There were no tire tracks, no sign anyone had stepped foot there in years. Claire shoved her gloves on and made her way through the high grass, every step crunching over decades of fallen shingles and rusted nails. The front panel of the barn was barely hanging on a few nails and a mercy. She pulled at one side. It groaned, then peeled back like a sunburnt scab. Light spilled into the interior, dancing off the dust and cobwebs. She froze. The air smelled like old oil and metal, and there, tucked almost reverently into the shadows, was something she couldn't make sense of. Smooth silver-gray metal, a rounded nose cone, panels with faint red stenciling, and above all, a shape no farm should ever hold. Claire took a step closer, her boots squishing through moss-covered concrete. It wasn't a tractor. It wasn't a trailer. It was an aircraft, a jet. She backed up slowly, pulse ticking loud in her ears. Then, unable to help herself, she stepped forward again and whispered the only words her mind could form. "What the hell are you doing in here?" Claire hadn't moved for a full 30 seconds. The air inside the barn felt heavier than it should, like it had been waiting. The fighter jet, or what looked like one, sat angled toward the collapsed wall, its nose just feet from where sunlight now poured through the open slats. One wing was folded back against the side wall, vines trailing over it, like nature had been trying to reclaim what didn't belong. She stepped closer, slowly, careful not to make any sudden noise, not because she thought it would respond, but because she didn't want to break the spell. Her boots crunched over leaves and broken glass as she reached out and ran a hand along the side of the jet. Cold metal, perfectly smooth under a layer of grime. This wasn't a movie prop. This wasn't someone's backyard experiment. This was real. The jet's canopy was intact, dusty, but unbroken, and the decals along the side were still visible in places, though partially worn. Letters stenciled in red, faded and scratched. U.S. Air Force. Just barely readable beneath the layers of time. Claire crouched and looked at the landing gear. Still extended, still intact. Tires deflated, but not rotted through. She traced the struts with her eyes, then stood up again and circled to the rear of the craft. Twin exhausts. Sleek, but not modern. Mid-century, maybe. Vietnam era? What the hell was something like this doing in a decaying barn on 5 acres of forgotten farmland? She pulled her phone from her pocket, opened the camera, and snapped a few pictures. But even through the lens, it didn't look real. It looked like a hallucination buried in rust. There were other things scattered around the edges of the barn, rusted barrels marked Jet Fuel 1946, broken crates, what looked like old maintenance tools scattered across a table half swallowed by moss. But no obvious papers, no tags, no logbooks, just the plane and silence. Claire turned back to the front of the jet and noticed something she hadn't before. The side panel of the cockpit was slightly ajar, bent, almost like someone had opened it and then walked away halfway through. Her hands moved before her brain did. She stepped onto a pile of cracked pallets and reached for the edge of the panel. It creaked slightly, but gave way. Inside the cockpit, dust motes swirled in the morning light. The seat was covered in a canvas cloth, rotted along the edges. Gauges and dials were still in place. Some had broken glass. Others looked frozen, like they'd stopped ticking and just never started again. Then she saw it. A faded photo, curled and yellowed, taped to the inside of the windshield. 2 men in jumpsuits, smiling. One of them was unmistakably younger, mid-30 seconds, square jaw, eyes like her father's. But it wasn't her dad. It was her grandfather. Claire stepped back, heart punching hard behind her ribs. What had she just found? And why did he never tell her? Claire barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that photo, her grandfather standing beside another man in front of the same jet, now sitting in her barn. She'd only ever known him as the quiet type, a farmer, a tinkerer, someone who fixed his own tractors and never missed a Sunday breakfast. But that look in his eyes, in that photo, it was different. Proud, confident, almost secretive. By morning, she couldn't stay away. The rising sun filtered through the treetops as she pulled up to the property again, thermos in one hand, crowbar in the other. The air smelled of dew and rust. She pushed the barn doors wider, letting in more light. It was still there, gray, imposing, impossible. She climbed up onto a stack of crates near the left wing and examined the insignia more closely. The paint beneath the dust still shimmered faintly when the light caught it. A roundel with a faded red ring, and a series of numbers stamped into the fuselage. FX 450. 1 do not fly. Her brow furrowed. Do not fly? She murmured aloud. The wording was strange. Usually, old prototypes had test markings, serial numbers, maybe a date. But this one felt like a warning. She pulled out her phone again and took more photos, every angle, every marking. Then she crouched by the nose and noticed a small hatch just beneath the cockpit, rusted shut, a faint rectangular outline. Curious. She pressed against it. It didn't budge. She hit it once with the crowbar. It rang out like a bell, hollow and clean. Whatever was inside wasn't rotted or empty. The sound made her stomach twist with both excitement and unease. This was no pile of junk. She sat back and stared at the aircraft for a long moment. Her reflection, small and ghostly, stared back from the polished metal under the grime. "Grandpa," she whispered. "What did you do?" Her phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her. It was a call from her friend Nate, a retired mechanic who'd spent 30 years at the nearby airfield. "Morning," he said. "You mentioned finding something weird in that barn. What kind of weird are we talking?" Claire hesitated. "You're not gonna believe me," she said. "Try me. An aircraft. Military, I think. Intact." There was a pause on the line. "You're joking." "I wish I was. It's got USAF markings. Serial number FX451 and—" She hesitated. "I found a picture of my grandfather inside it." Another long pause. "Send me a photo," Nate said, his tone suddenly careful. She did. Silence followed for almost a full minute. Then Nate said quietly, "Claire, I'm on my way. Don't touch anything else." She frowned. "Why?" "Because if that's what I think it is, someone's going to want it back." The call ended. Claire turned toward the jet again, the morning light glinting off its cockpit glass. For the first time since she bought the barn, she felt something unfamiliar crawl up her spine, not awe, not excitement. It was fear. Nate arrived just after noon in his faded green pickup, the one with a cracked windshield and toolbox rattling in the back. Claire waved him down from the edge of the barn, and he stepped out slowly, not like a man approaching an old friend, but like someone walking toward a crime scene he wasn't sure he wanted to remember. She didn't speak right away, just let him inside. When Nate saw the jet, he stopped cold. "Jesus," he whispered. Claire watched his eyes scan every inch of it, the markings, the wing folds, the faint "Do not fly" lettering. He moved slowly, like he was afraid the thing might breathe. He walked once around it in silence, then placed a gloved hand against the fuselage. "Claire," he finally said, "you need to understand something. This isn't a training plane. It's not a museum piece. This is something they erased." She crossed her arms, trying to stay calm. "I found it by accident. I bought the land for scrap." Nate didn't respond. He climbed the makeshift pallet stack and leaned into the open cockpit, careful not to touch anything. Claire stood beside him and pointed to the photo still taped to the inside of the windshield. "That's my grandfather," she said. "I'm sure of it. But I don't understand how he never talked about this. Not once." Nate reached into his back pocket and pulled out a pair of reading glasses. He studied the photo carefully, then let out a long breath. "That's James Jensen, all right." "I haven't seen his face in 40 years, but I remember it. He used to be at the Lockridge base. Civilian contractor, I think. Worked on classified propulsion systems in the 70s. Then, he just dropped off the radar." Claire blinked. "I thought he was a mechanic. He died when I was a kid. No one ever talked about his work." Nate stared at the photo for another long beat, then pulled out his phone. "I'm going to make a call." Quietly. "To who?" He hesitated. "Someone who worked black projects. He might know what FX451 was. If he picks up." As Nate stepped outside, Claire climbed fully into the cockpit. Dust coated every surface, but it was eerily preserved. The switches were still labeled, though half the gauges were dead. Her fingers hovered over the controls, all analog. No digital screens. This thing was older than she thought, yet somehow more advanced than anything she'd seen in museums. On the seat beside her, under the torn canvas, she noticed something. A small dog tag on a faded chain. It wasn't military issued. Not entirely. She picked it up. Jensen. J.A. Flight 07. Widow's hand. Her blood ran cold. She'd never heard that phrase before, but it hit her like a name spoken in a dream. Down below, Nate's voice rose slightly on the phone, sharp with concern. "Yeah, no tail number, no records. Just hidden." Claire sat in the dead silence of the cockpit and held the tag like it was radioactive. What had her grandfather been part of? And more urgently, why was it left behind? Claire couldn't stop staring at the dog tag. "Widow's hand" sounded less like a call sign and more like something pulled from a Cold War thriller. She slid it into her jacket pocket just as Nate stepped back inside, phone still in hand, face tight. "He hung up," Nate said. "Didn't even say goodbye." Claire frowned. "Who was he?" "Worked intel for a contractor that built subsonic drones in the late 70 seconds. I only mentioned the jet serial number. His voice changed instantly. Told me to drop it and not call again. Great, she muttered. So we found a ghost plane no one wants to admit exists. Nate didn't smile. Claire, planes don't just disappear from the government's radar unless someone wants them to. You said your grandfather was in that picture? If he flew this thing, then he wasn't just some contractor. He was a test pilot. Or worse, part of something no one was supposed to talk about. Claire's skin prickled. You think it's dangerous? I think, Nate said, glancing around the barn like they were being watched, that if the wrong people find out you have this, you won't be the one calling them. They'll be coming to you. Oh, that night, after Nate left, Claire couldn't stop thinking about the tag, the photo, the markings on the plane. She sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, running searches through every aviation forum and declassified archive she could find. Nothing on FX 451. Nothing on Widow's Hand. So she tried something different. She pulled out an old metal box of her grandfather's belongings, mostly junk she'd never sorted after he passed. Tools, receipts, a few faded letters. At the bottom was a small, leather-bound notebook she didn't remember ever seeing. It had no title, just JJ embossed on the corner in worn gold. Claire opened it and flipped through. Most of it was indecipherable sketches of airframes, cryptic engine diagrams, pages full of math that meant nothing to her. But one page caught her eye. It was a list. Names. All first names or call signs. Then, near the bottom, read 2. Scrubbed. Falcon. Kia. Confirmed. Fox. Buried project. Lock. After loss. Widow's Hand. Secure. Last flown. Claire stared at that line. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned the page, but it was blank. The rest of the notebook was 2. She sat back, heart pounding. What the hell had her grandfather been part of? The next morning, she made one mistake. She called the county records office to see if anyone had ever registered a military aircraft on the property in the last 50 years. She gave them the parcel number. The woman on the other end was polite at first, but after asking for Claire's full name and hearing it, her tone shifted. "One moment, please." Claire waited. Then, click. The line went dead. No dial tone. No message. Just silence. Claire stared at her phone and whispered to no one. "I think I just woke something up." The knock came at 9:17 a.m. Not the polite kind. Not a neighbor asking for sugar or a delivery driver fumbling with a package. It was firm, intentional. 3 slow thuds that didn't wait for a response, they announced themselves. Claire's stomach sank. She glanced out the front window. A black SUV idled at the edge of her gravel driveway. Unmarked, clean, tinted windows. The kind of vehicle that didn't belong in her sleepy corner of Hartland County. 2 men stood at the door. One wore a navy windbreaker, the other a suit with no tie. Both had military haircuts and blank expressions. The taller one held a leather folder tucked neatly under one arm. Claire opened the door, just enough to speak through the crack. "Can I help you?" "Claire Jensen?" the taller man asked. Not a greeting, a verification. She hesitated. "Who's asking?" "Department of Historical Defense Integration," he said smoothly, like it was a phrase meant to sound harmless. "Mind if we ask you a few questions?" She blinked. "That's not a real department." He smiled like it wasn't the first time someone had said that. "We're looking into the transfer of federal surplus properties. Your name came up connected to a recent county auction." Her mouth went dry. "The barn?" she asked. "We'd prefer to look at it ourselves," the second man said, his voice lower, more measured. "We understand it may contain sensitive materials." Claire didn't move. "What kind of materials?" The taller one's smile dropped. "That depends on what you found." Claire hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to lie. "It's just scrap," she said. "Mostly rotted timber and some rusted tools. Nothing I can't haul out myself." Both men glanced at each other. The second one spoke again. "You didn't find a jet?" She met his gaze. Held it. "A jet?" "No." A pause. Then the taller one opened his folder. Inside was a photo aerial, black and white, grainy of the barn. It had a timestamp from 2 weeks ago. In the photo, the roof was still collapsed, but barely visible beneath the broken rafters was the nose of the aircraft, just enough to recognize what it was. Claire's blood turned to ice. "We believe a piece of experimental property may have been stored there without authorization," the man in the suit said calmly. "If it's found, it should be surrendered for evaluation and safe disposal. These systems are unstable. They were never meant to be activated." Claire swallowed. "Well, I haven't found anything like that." A long pause. Then the taller man handed her a card, plain white, no name, just a phone number, and the phrase, "Call immediately." "If you do," he said, "call us first. Not the sheriff, not the press. Understood?" Claire nodded, fingers tightening on the card. The two men walked back to their SUV, got in, and drove away without another word. She stood frozen in the doorway, heart pounding so loud she couldn't hear herself think. They knew, and worse, they hadn't taken it. That meant they weren't done yet. Claire didn't go back to the barn that day. Instead, she locked her doors, turned off her phone, and pulled her grandfather's storage box from the closet where it had gathered dust since his funeral. She carried it to the kitchen table and opened it slowly, like it might explode. The top layer was familiar. A pocket knife, his old flight jacket, a photo of her as a toddler perched on his shoulders, both of them covered in oil stains and grinning. But underneath, it got stranger. Blueprints. Not full ones, fragments. Wing schematics, circuit layouts, all marked with military-looking watermarks. Property of USAF Test Division. The dates were from the mid-1970s. Claire's eyes scanned quickly. Most were labeled in a code she didn't understand, but the initials JJ were scribbled in the corners of nearly all of them. In the bottom of the box was an envelope. No stamp. Just her name, written in her grandfather's sharp, practical handwriting. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside were 3 pages. Handwritten, no greeting, no date. "Claire, if you're reading this, then either I've told you what I never meant to, or you found the thing I swore I buried with time. Either way, I owe you truth. In 1975, I was contracted to work on a program called Widow's Hand. It wasn't on the books, no press releases. It was the kind of project you didn't get assigned to, you were chosen. We were building something that didn't officially exist, something that could outmaneuver satellites, disappear off radar, and land without ever filing a flight path. A ghost, built for the war we hoped never came. We succeeded. Too well. 1 test flight, 1 pilot lost. Official story. Crash over water, no recovery. Truth. The jet made it back. The pilot didn't. And no one knew what to do next. Claire's hands trembled as she read. We sealed it up, buried the records. Each team member was told to vanish. I was offered a new identity. I refused. I came home, got quiet, started fixing tractors and never spoke of it again. I never thought they'd forget. I just thought maybe they'd stop looking. The final line was underlined twice. If you've found the jet, do not try to sell it. Do not tell the government. And for God's sake, do not try to fly it. It remembers things we don't. Claire sat back in her chair, heart thundering. Her grandfather hadn't just been involved, he'd hidden it, kept it close, protected it, maybe even watched it from afar every day until he died. A fighter jet worth millions, a ghost aircraft no one wanted found, a girl with a name that until now she thought meant nothing more than oil changes and Sunday pancakes. But now, Claire Jensen wasn't just someone who found something, she was someone who was meant to. By morning, Claire was obsessed. The idea that a government-sanctioned aircraft could exist without documentation felt impossible. But the longer she looked, the clearer the silence became. Every database she tried, from public archives to obscure aviation registries, came up empty. FX 450, 1, didn't exist. not even as a test vehicle. There were FX 440 seconds and FX 460 seconds, even FX 450, but no 451. It had been skipped or scrubbed. She even tried reaching out to a small aviation historian forum under a fake username. She posted a blurry, untraceable image of the aircraft's tail section and asked if anyone had seen a similar design. The thread was removed in under 5 minutes. No explanation. No warning. Just gone. Claire sat back in her chair, chilled. This wasn't just buried. It was erased. That afternoon, she drove to the local Air and Space Museum, trying to look casual as she browsed the exhibits. A volunteer docent in his 60 seconds noticed her staring at a mock-up of a Cold War stealth interceptor. "Interested in prototypes?" he asked with a smile. Claire nodded. "Kind of. I found a piece of an old airframe out in the woods. Looked like a jet, but the serial was weird. FX 451. Ever heard of something like that?" The man's smile faltered just slightly, not enough for most people to notice. But Claire did. He muttered. "Doesn't ring a bell. Sounds like it might have been an internal, only classification." "You mean like a prototype?" He shrugged. "Possibly. But that series would have been phased out by 76. Anything from that era would be long declassified." Claire watched him closely. "What if it wasn't?" He chuckled nervously. "Then you didn't find it." "And I didn't hear anything." He walked away before she could reply. By the time she returned to the barn, the sun was low and the sky tinted orange. The jet sat in its silent place like it had for decades, unchanged, untouched, and somehow waiting. She stepped inside and flicked on the work light she'd strung from the rafters. The beam caught the lettering again. FX 450. 1 do not fly. Claire walked along the wing and stopped at the rear fuselage, brushing away more dirt and vines. There, almost invisible, was a recessed access panel with a tiny hex screw. She retrieved her socket set from the truck and gently removed the fasteners. The panel slid free with a soft hiss. Inside was something she didn't expect. Wires. Bundled tight, clearly post-manufacture. And behind them, a sealed metal junction box with a plastic Ziploc bag taped to the back. Claire carefully peeled it free. Inside was a flash drive, wrapped in black electrical tape, labeled with a single phrase written in faded red ink. "Widow's hand logbook divided by final build." Her mouth went dry. She stood in the quiet hum of the barn, the flash drive clutched in her palm, and understood two things. This plane didn't just vanish, it was buried with intention. And now, thanks to her, it was about to wake up. Claire didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the flash drive under the dim light of a dusty lamp, afraid to plug it in. She kept thinking about her grandfather's letter, the part where he warned her not to try to fly the jet. It remembers things we don't. What the hell did that mean? By morning, curiosity won. She booted up an old, offline laptop, one she'd used in college. No internet, no Bluetooth, just keys that stuck, and a screen with one stubborn pixel forever burnt green. She plugged the flash drive in and held her breath. It whirred quietly, the LED blinking once. Then a folder appeared on the desktop. Widow's hand flight records divided by Phase 3. Inside were subfolders. Build data, flight logs, mission notes, images, each packed with diagrams, typed memos, and grainy black and white photographs of the jet in various stages of assembly. One document caught her eye immediately. Configuration D. Adaptive Wing System. Claire opened it and blinked in disbelief. The diagrams showed a technology she'd never seen. A variable geometry wing structure with embedded hydraulic folds and a flex system that adjusted to pressure changes mid-flight. The language was dense, full of terminology she didn't fully understand. But one line stood out. Project emphasis. Dynamic shape modulation. Capable of unregistered atmospheric entry without radar detection. It could change shape. It could disappear. Her pulse quickened. She raced back to the barn, flash drive in her jacket pocket. She needed to see those wings again. She grabbed a flashlight and climbed onto a reinforced pallet she'd rigged up beside the starboard side. With a wrench, she carefully loosened the wing's outer panel, expecting dead wires and rust. Instead, she found something far more advanced than 1,970 seconds tech. Hydraulic lines, preserved and clean, servo motors that looked custom-machined. Even the insulation was modern, like it had been updated long after the plane was buried. Had someone maintained this? No, not someone. Her grandfather. That's why it was still intact. That's why it didn't look like it had been touched in decades, because he'd been touching it all along. Quietly, carefully, making sure it stayed ready. Claire moved deeper into the wing cavity. Just past the servos, taped flat against the inner wall, was a panel marked "Active system do not energize." She stepped back. There were ports, connectors, something that looked like it was designed to interface with an external battery source. Her mind reeled. This wasn't just a display piece, this thing could still function, maybe even fly. Her fingers hovered over the wiring. Then she caught herself. Her grandfather's voice echoed in memory. "Do not try to fly it." Claire pulled back, heart racing. The jet wasn't just an artifact. It was an animal, in hibernation. And if she wasn't careful, she might be the one to wake it up. Claire didn't go near the panel again. Instead, she climbed out of the wing cavity and sat on the concrete floor of the barn, hands covered in dust and grease, pulse still erratic. The jet loomed above her, silent as ever. But it no longer felt dormant. It felt patient. She needed answers, real ones. That night, she took the flash drive back to the offline laptop and opened the next folder, flight logs. Inside were 15 files, each labeled with a date and pilot ID. The final file was labeled simply, Flight 7 Final. She opened it. Mission parameters, unknown, pilot ID. JJ, date, redacted. Departure, Lockridge Test Site, 0417 hours. Return, not confirmed. Notes, system engaged mid-flight. External telemetry lost. Internal telemetry restored upon re-entry. No contact with ground until manual override initiated. Pilot non-responsive upon landing. Claire's breath caught in her throat. Pilot, JJ, her grandfather. She scrolled down. There were biometric logs, heart rate spikes, oxygen irregularities, blackout markers. It read like something torn from a near-death experience. Then came a line that chilled her. Subject reported, temporal fragmentation during re-entry. Time discrepancy, 3 hours, 14 minutes unaccounted for. Internal clock recorded negative time lapse. She stared at that last line, rereading it. Negative time lapse. What did that even mean? She opened the next folder. Mission notes. Most were clipped reports, short bursts of military language. But the last one was different. Hand, typed. No letterhead. Just a simple title. Post. Flight debrief, J. Jensen. When I came back, I wasn't sure I had come back at all. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. It was like the jet landed before I did. The stars were wrong. The clocks were wrong. I didn't speak for 2 days. I don't know if I dreamed it or lived it. We built something that didn't belong in our world. We didn't understand it, not really. It learned, mid-flight, adapted, responded to thoughts I hadn't said out loud. I named it Widow's Hand because the day we finished it was the day I stopped being who I was. It doesn't belong in the air, but it doesn't belong buried either. I didn't have the heart to destroy it, so I hid it, in plain sight. On land, no one wanted. In a barn, no one remembered, waiting for someone who could make the decision I couldn't. Claire sat in silence, her hand shaking slightly as she closed the file. He hadn't just flown the plane. He'd been changed by it. And now, she'd found it. Or maybe it had found her. Her laptop made a faint clicking sound to drive. The screen flashed once. Then, a new folder appeared, unprompted. Recognized pilot JJ2. Claire stared at it. JJ2. Her. She didn't open it. Not yet. Because something in her gut whispered that once she did, everything would change again. Claire didn't sleep. Again. The folder on her laptop, recognized pilot JJ2, sat like a challenge. She hadn't touched it. Not because she wasn't curious, but because every instinct screamed that opening it would be like crossing a line. One she couldn't uncross. By sunrise, her phone, the one she had powered off for days, was blinking. 5 missed calls from Nate. 2 voicemails. 1 text. "We need to talk. Someone's been asking questions, not local." Claire called him back from a prepaid flip phone she found in a junk drawer. When he answered, his voice was tight. No small talk. "They came to the airfield last night," he said. 2 suits, like the ones who came to your place. They asked about you and about your grandfather." Claire swallowed. "What did you say?" "I said I hadn't seen you in weeks, that I thought you were in Atlanta. They didn't push, but one of them knew your truck's plate number." "How the hell?" "I don't know. But Claire, they're not feds, not in the normal way." She glanced at her laptop. "I believe it. I made a call to an old radar tech I worked with. Used to handle black airspace coordination out of Nevada. He owed me a favor." "And?" Nate hesitated. "He told me Widow's Hand wasn't a plane. It was a program. A corridor, actually. Experimental airspace protocol for off-book aircraft. No comms, no beacons, no radar footprint. A blind lane, like a highway with the lights off." Claire stood up, pacing. "And this jet used it?" "Yeah, but only once apparently. Then the lane was shut down, deactivated, burned from every logbook." "Why?" "They lost contact mid-flight. Pilot reappeared hours later on base tarmac. But here's the thing the guy told me, quote, telemetry said he landed before he left. Claire closed her eyes. Nate kept going. The story vanished. Everyone involved either disappeared or retired early. But there was a rumor something about the aircraft developing partial autonomy, a reactive system. It started learning, thinking. Claire turned toward the barn, its doors still shut. Nate had recognized me. He was quiet. "What?" I plugged in the drive. It labeled me JJ, 2-second Jensen. It's still aware. He swore under his breath. "Claire, you need to decide what you want, because I think they're circling. And I don't think they'll ask nicely next time." Claire looked down at her hands, stained with grease, trembling just slightly. "I don't want to hide," she said softly. "Then you'd better be ready," Nate replied. "Because if they come for it, they're coming for you too." She hung up and walked to the barn. She stood before the jet, its smooth frame still glinting faintly in the morning light. Then, without thinking, she spoke aloud. "I'm not my grandfather." A moment passed, and then softly the canopy hissed open. Like it had been waiting for her all along, Claire stood frozen beneath the yawning canopy, watching the hydraulic arms lock into place with eerie precision. The movement was smooth, not the stiff groan of aged machinery, but deliberate, intact, alive. The jet wasn't waking up. It was welcoming her. She stepped forward slowly, climbing the same stack of pallets she'd used before. But this time, she didn't hesitate. She swung a leg into the cockpit and slid down into the pilot's seat. It was worn, but solid, familiar, somehow. Her hand rested on the stick, her other hovering over the console. The panels lit up. No ignition, no battery, nothing connected. Yet every gauge flickered to life. The screen's analog just hours ago now projected faint blue overlays. Not glass, holographic. Claire blinked as a readout formed on the console glass. Piloted, Jensen. C. Protocol initiated. Ghost return. Previous flight. 07 mission status. Incomplete. She gripped the edge of the seat. "What do you mean, incomplete?" No answer, of course. But the dashboard shifted, Screen after screen, cascading open footage, biometric logs, faded digital memories. Then one stopped her cold. A visual log. Flight 7, her grandfather. She'd tapped it. The screen dimmed. And suddenly, Claire saw what he saw. A camera, maybe helmet-mounted, showed the inside of the jet during takeoff. Her grandfather's breathing was sharp but calm. He lifted off from a desert airstrip under total radio silence. The sun was just rising in the frame. Then, something changed. The sky began to darken, unnaturally fast. The clouds reversed. The altimeter blinked, then spun backward. And then everything went black. The video stuttered, froze, then resumed inside a starless sky. No horizon, no Sunday, just darkness. Her grandfather's voice came through, faint and strained. Where am I? The stars, these aren't ours. Not our sky. Then silence. Then, I'm not alone up here. Claire yanked off the headset, her pulse thundering. The footage ended with a final log entry, typed in all caps. Do not attempt flight. Aircraft retains data. AI system triggers reconnection. Flight path unstable. Time loop confirmed. Do not follow. Claire leaned back, breath shallow. This wasn't a malfunction. It was a one-way door. And her grandfather hadn't fully come back. At least not the same. The cockpit dimmed again, but one more message blinked onto the console. Manual override. Accepted pilot. J2. Continue mission. Y divided by N. She stared at the screen, paralyzed. The jet didn't just fly. It remembered. It reached. And now it wanted her to finish something that began before she was even born. A soft vibration ran through the seat. The engines were spooling without fuel. And in the distance, a second SUV pulled into view at the edge of the trees. 2 men stepped out. Claire looked at the screen again. Y divided by N. She didn't press anything, but the jet was already warming up. Claire didn't move. The jet's hum deepened into a low, steady vibration beneath her feet. Not loud, not violent. Just there, like a heartbeat awakening after a long sleep. The canopy remained open, but every screen around her pulsed faintly, as though waiting for a command it already expected. Outside, the 2 men from the SUV advanced slowly toward the barn. They weren't running, weren't shouting, just walking calm and practiced, like they'd done this before. Claire watched through the narrow crack in the hangar siding. One of them held something, not a weapon, but a device. A tablet maybe, or a scanner. Then the jet pulsed again. This time, the lights came on, all of them. White-blue beams exploded from the underside of the wings, casting sharp shadows through the barn's broken rafters. A strobing halo formed around the fuselage. Dust flared into the air like ash. Claire flinched as her vision adjusted. The screens around her flickered in unison. System resonance locked. Memory recovery complete. Clearance override. Accepted by 2. The men outside stopped. One of them spoke into a radio. The other slowly raised his device and pointed it toward the barn. Claire didn't wait. She reached up and slammed the canopy shut. It sealed with a hiss, and the cockpit dimmed again, not into darkness, but into a cold, unreal blue. She felt it deep in her chest now. Something otherworldly, like a frequency she couldn't hear but her bones could. She was shaking, not from fear, from the energy humming through her. Another message flashed. Interface unlocked, simulated flight mode active. Return to entry path. Y divided by N. She didn't press anything, but her hand, almost involuntarily, slid onto the throttle, and the jet responded. The engine didn't roar. It whispered, like it was saving something, like sound would draw too much attention. The entire barn began to shake, the loose rafters above groaning under pressure. Outside, the men panicked. One of them shouted into a headset. The other ran back toward the SUV. A voice boomed suddenly into her cockpit, not from the radio, but from inside the jet's system. Filtered, distorted, male, pilot confirmed. Phase 4 unlocked. Jensen protocol engaged. Claire gasped. That wasn't her grandfather's voice. But it sounded like him. She tried to cancel it, to shut something off, but the system was no longer listening. It was leading. A final line blinked in red. Flight 7A. Initiating pre-launch sequence. Prepare for ascent. Claire's breath caught. The barn roof above her, the part that hadn't collapsed, shifted. Slowly. Then, with a violent crack, the center split open. Not by accident. By design, panels retracted upward, as if the barn had always been meant to open. The jet was lighting up, like it had never stopped flying. And Claire realized, maybe it hadn't. The roof split wide with a groan that echoed into the trees. Claire stared upward, through the widening mouth of the barn as panels folded away like mechanical flower petals. Dust, light, and wind spilled in from the sky, swirling around her as if the earth itself was giving permission to rise. But the jet didn't launch. Not yet. The screens inside the cockpit had shifted again. A new tab had opened, labeled simply, Jensen family files locked until return. She tapped it. A password prompt blinked once, then vanished. The system already knew who she was. One by one, the files decrypted. Some were technical flight logs, test parameters, but others were personal. Letters, reports, transcripts. And one document stood out. Debriefing. Operation Widow's Hand containment failure. Claire opened it. Following the disappearance and unscheduled return of test pilot Claire Jensen, all assets associated with Widow's Hand were reclassified Tier 0, non-trackable. The subject returned with memory loss, time inconsistencies, and psychological anomalies. Subsequent attempts to replicate flight path failed. Engineering teams reported system awareness during final calibration phases. AI core displayed adaptive behavior, initiating sequences without human command. The aircraft is not deemed weaponizable in its current state. Containment advised. Termination orders rescinded after Operator Jensen refused compliance. The project was dissolved. All physical components were lost in decommission. All involved personnel reassigned, retired, or scrubbed. Final line. Aircraft sealed in unmarked location under supervision of civilian custodian. JJ. All digital links destroyed. No further investigation approved. Claire leaned back in her seat, stomach twisting. Her grandfather hadn't buried the jet out of fear. He had refused to destroy it. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was aware. Because it had done something no one could explain. Because when he came back, he wasn't just different, he was carrying memories from outside time. Claire opened one more file. A transcript. A one-on-one interview between Jensen and someone only labeled as Director S. S. Did it speak to you, JJ? No, not in words. S. Then how do you know it remembers? JJ. Because it brought me home before I asked. Because it showed me my son before he was born. S. What are you saying, JJ? I'm saying it's not a machine. I'm saying it wants something. S. What does it want, JJ? A pilot. Claire's hands trembled. Outside, the SUV was gone. But a second one now sat at the base of the road. Headlights off. No one moved. They were waiting to see what she'd do. Inside the cockpit, the jet systems had fully engaged. No fuel, no external power. And yet, it hummed like a living thing. Claire looked up at the open sky. The jet had never been just a prototype. It was a message, a memory, a mirror of whoever dared sit inside it. And it wasn't done flying. Not yet. Claire sat in the cockpit, hands still and eyes wide, surrounded by the quiet hum of a machine older than her and somehow more alive. The roof above her had folded away like a secret unfolding. The forest outside sat still, tense. And down the road, another SUV waited, like a silent shadow. She wasn't sure who they were anymore. Government? Private contractors? Something worse? But what terrified her most wasn't them. It was the jet, and the part of her that wanted to see what happened if she let it fly. The final folder on the console blinked again. A single line of text appeared in pale white. Read to. Last correspondence. She tapped it. A letter unfolded on the screen, dated 2 months after her grandfather's last recorded flight. To read to, we did what we swore we wouldn't. We let the tech outpace our understanding. The widow's hand isn't just responsive, it's recursive. Every time it flies, it learns. But not just flight patterns. It mirrors us. Picks up more than telemetry. Our memories, our thoughts, our guilt. It builds something from us we never meant to share. That flight broke me. You know it. I came back, but I don't think I came back alone. I see things now. Patterns, flashes, places I've never been but remember. I wrote down coordinates I never learned. I dream of a sky with no stars. And sometimes, when I walk past the barn, I swear the damn plane breathes. You told me to destroy it. Maybe I should have, but I didn't. I'm not hiding it for glory. I'm hiding it because I think it's looking for someone else. Someone it can bond with. Clean. Someone who doesn't carry the war on their back. I was a soldier. It learned war. Maybe that's why it changed. If you find this, and you find her the next one, tell her she can walk away. Or she can finish what we couldn't. JJ. Claire leaned forward, elbows on her knees, head in her hands. Her grandfather hadn't been afraid of what the jet did. He'd been afraid of what he did to it. She stood up in the cockpit and opened the canopy. Cool air hit her face, grounding her. The second SUV was gone now. Only tire tracks remained. Fresh and silent. They weren't going to take it. They wanted her to choose. Suddenly, the ground beneath the jet trembled again just once, like a pulse from below. The barn floor cracked slightly beneath the weight, and Claire heard it, not with her ears, but somewhere deeper. A question, a call, not in words, but in something that felt like memory. She stepped down from the cockpit, feet landing softly on concrete. She walked to the edge of the barn and looked out across the field, wind teasing the trees like the forest was holding its breath. This wasn't a relic. It was a threshold, and she was the key. Claire stood at the edge of the barn's gaping mouth, watching the trees sway in nervous silence. The jet sat behind her like a living shadow, engine whispering with the soft resonance of something that didn't belong entirely to this world. Or maybe belonged to too many. She looked down at the gravel, where the SUV's fresh tracks had already faded into dust. They had left her alone for now. No threats, no arrests. Because they knew something she was only just beginning to understand. Widow's hand didn't obey orders. It chose. And now, it had chosen her. Claire turned back toward the jet, the same one that had swallowed part of her grandfather's life, and maybe something of his soul. But what it gave back was different. She saw that now. His silence hadn't been fear, it had been reverence and regret. He'd seen what it could do, what it could learn. He wasn't protecting it from the world. He was protecting the world from what it might become. But it hadn't destroyed him. Not completely. It had left a message behind. Her. The last screen on the console still blinked, patient as ever. JJ. 2. Awaiting decision. Complete mission? Y divided by N? Claire climbed back into the cockpit, slowly, methodically. Her hands moved without hesitation now. She buckled the harness, pressed her palms to the throttle and flight stick. A low chime rang out, the kind that vibrated more through bone than air. She closed her eyes and said, yes. Nothing dramatic happened. No roar, no flash, just the soft hum of acceptance. The jet systems flared to life in a smooth wave, one panel after another, igniting with ghostly light. Data streamed across the console, not in code, but in memories, images, places she'd never been yet recognized. A frozen coastline, a black sky with no stars, a silhouette of a pilot floating, helmet off, eyes open but far away. Then, silence. The jet began to lift, not forward, up. The barn floor cracked as the craft levitated without fanfare, inches at first, then feet. Claire's heart pounded. The roof split wider above her, welcoming its only tenant. She didn't touch the controls. It flew itself, upward through the roof, into the open sky, wind rushing past in a soundless blur. The trees bowed, the clouds parted, the world fell away, and Claire didn't look back. As the ground shrank, the readouts changed. Mission 7. A initiated. Temporal re-entry window establishing. Pilot sync complete. Memory coalescence active. Then, one final message across the glass. You are not a passenger. You are the story. The sky darkened, the stars shifted, and the jet vanished not with fire, but with silence. Not gone, just beyond, waiting. Once again, for someone brave enough to believe that the past isn't always behind us. Sometimes, it's ahead wearing wings.